Did you see the Nikkei's performance this week? It's, not doing well despite the weaker yen.
Yeah, it's kind of puzzling, isn't it?
Exactly. You'd think a weaker yen would boost the stock market,
Right.
but weaknesses on Wall Street and caution before central bank decisions are impacting it.
But didn't the Nikkei rise slightly at midday?
Well, it rose 0.2% to 38,889.95, but it's still on track for a weekly decline of about 1.5%.
And the Topix index? How's that looking?
The Topix added 0.11%, but it's also heading for its worst week since mid-October, down about 1.2%.
So the Bank of Japan's decision not to hike interest rates didn't have much effect?
Not really. Governor Ueda mentioned that considerable time is needed to judge the outlook for domestic wages and overseas economies, especially the U.S.
Yeah. But with the U.S. Federal Reserve signaling a cautious pace of rate cuts in 2025, isn't that affecting global markets?
Exactly. After the Fed trimmed rates by a quarter point, they've indicated caution, which is spilling over to other markets.
It's interesting how interconnected everything is.
It really is. Even though the yen is weaker, the dollar-yen pair touched 157.93, the Nikkei isn't benefiting.
It's like, having all the ingredients, but the recipe still doesn't work out.
That's a good way to put it. While exporters like Toyota gained 2.7%, other sectors are dragging the market down.
But shouldn't the weaker yen help more companies?
In theory, yes. But banks, for example, shed about 2.3%, making them the worst performers.
Maybe because lower bond yields affect their profits?
Exactly. With Japanese government bond yields sinking to one-month lows, banks are feeling the pressure.
But I thought lower yields would stimulate borrowing and economic activity. Isn't that beneficial overall?
Well, that's true to an extent, but banks make money from higher yields, so lower yields can squeeze their margins.
I see your point. But perhaps the long-term benefits could outweigh the short-term drawbacks?
Possibly, but investors are reacting to immediate impacts.
That's fair. So, what's the finance minister saying about all this?
Katsunobu Kato expressed concern over recent forex moves, threatening action against speculative trades.
Do you think that will stabilize the yen?
It's hard to say. Market interventions can be tricky.
Speaking of tricky, I heard about Katakawa's stock plummeting.
Yes. They announced a capital tie-up with Sony instead of an expected acquisition, and their stock is set to fall by the daily limit.
But Sony's stock went up by 3.1%, didn't it?
Exactly. It's interesting how one company's news can have opposite effects on different stocks.
Indeed. Maybe the market is overreacting to some of these developments.
That could be the case. Sometimes the market's short-term reactions don't reflect long-term fundamentals.
Investors might just be feeling jittery ahead of central bank decisions.
Probably. It's like everyone's holding their breath, waiting to see what happens next.
Well, let's hope for some positive news soon.
Definitely. We could all use a bit of good news in the markets.